The air in the Special Collections vault possessed a sacred, immutable quality, perpetually 55 degrees Fahrenheit, 45% humidity, smelling of chilled stone, slow paper decay, and the faint, clean chemical scent of the dehumidifiers. Isla moved through the silent, towering aisles with the fluid grace of a somnambulist in a temple of forgotten dreams, her hands sheathed in pristine white cotton gloves, her footsteps hushed by rubber-soled flats. Each gray archival box, perfectly aligned, represented a life condensed to keywords in her own neat, minuscule script on acid-free labels. Winter's Family Correspondence, 1880-1899, Shipyard Payroll Ledgers, 1902-1905, Botanical Sketches, unattributed, circa 1830. Order was not merely her profession, it was her nervous system, the invisible architecture that held her world in coherent, manageable form. This architecture was mirrored with an almost terrifying symmetry in the life she had built with Ben. He was a structural engineer, a man who believed in mathematical certainty, in load-bearing truths, in the elegant logic of forces distributed safely to the ground. Their love was a feat of modern engineering, a suspension bridge of shared values, predictable in its stresses, beautiful in its reliable span. They had met as undergraduates, drawn together by a mutual appreciation for quiet libraries, practical life plans, and a deep, unspoken fear of chaos. 7 years later, they resided in a flawlessly renovated loft in a converted warehouse, maintained a meticulously balanced joint investment portfolio, and were in the advanced planning stages of a wedding for the following June. The planning was itself an exercise in benign engineering. Venue capacity calculations, guest list optimization, a color palette selected for timelessness rather than passion. Ben was, by every conceivable measure, a good man. He was her dearest friend, her most trusted ally. So why, on this particular Tuesday morning, did the sight of the spreadsheet tab labeled Catering Options, Comparative Analysis, open on his laptop send a silent, screaming wave of panic through her veins? A sensation like being buried alive in an avalanche of beige linen? The disruption to this impeccably ordered existence did not arrive with a dramatic crash, but with a tersely worded interdepartmental memo, its corners precisely aligned on her sterile desk. The museum's board, in a contentious split decision, had approved a 6-week research residency for one Leo Thorne, a contemporary artist of some notoriety and negligible respectability within the hallowed halls of the institution. His proposed project, grandly titled Palimpsest, Erasures and Ghosts in the Official Narrative, aimed to excavate the subtextual tremors and personal apocalypses buried beneath the museum's polished veneer of history. He was to be granted strictly supervised, limited access to certain non-restricted collections. The curatorial staff was polarized. Some hailed it as a vital, provocative engagement with the institution's own myth-making. Others decried it as a form of intellectual vandalism. Isla's director, a man who valued dust-free surfaces above all, slid the memo towards her with a sigh of profound weariness. He's your cross to bear for the next month and a half, Isla. Your primary objectives are thus, keep him out of the temperature-controlled vaults, ensure he does not apply any form of adhesive, paint, or other medium to any artifact, original or reproduced, and try, if at all possible, to prevent him from deconstructing the very concept of historical truth in a public forum. Good luck. Leo Thorne did not resemble any artist whose portrait hung in the museum's gilded galleries. He appeared on a damp Monday morning, 47 minutes late, trailing an aura of rain-soaked wool, turpentine, and something earthier, like wet clay or forgotten subway tunnels. He was perhaps in his early 30s, but possessed a kind of ageless, restless energy that made chronology irrelevant. He was lean, all coiled tension and sharp angles, dressed in paint-encrusted denim and a leather jacket scarred with what looked like chemical burns or ancient tears. His hair was a dark, unruly thicket, and his eyes were a piercing, disconcerting shade of gray, the color of a winter sky moments before a storm. He offered no apology for his tardiness, no pleasantries. He simply stood in the doorway of her orderly office, his gaze sweeping over the shelves of reference books and labeled boxes with an expression of amused contempt. "So you're the keeper of the keys," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that seemed to wear away at the edges of the room's silence. "The guardian of the sanctioned past. I am the senior archivist, Isla. I will be facilitating your research access within the established guidelines." Her tone was professionally cool, a shield of polished bureaucracy. He let out a short, derisive laugh that held no warmth. "Facilitating, guidelines, wonderful. Let's see what skeletons you've got locked in the closet." From that initial, sparking collision, he became a walking embodiment of entropy in her universe of perfect, frozen time. He dismissed the carefully prepared selection of materials she had deemed appropriate dry trustees' meeting minutes, inventories of donated silver, correspondence concerning the acquisition of morally upright landscape paintings. He was magnetically drawn to the discarded, the misfiled, the emotionally volatile. He spent an entire afternoon photographing a box of broken plaster acanthus leaves from a demolished Edwardian staircase. He pored over the furious, blotched diary of a Victorian undergardener who detailed his hatred for the head gardener and his secret love for the scullery maid. He became fixated on a single water-stained theater program for a long-forgotten comedy, found pressed between the pages of a geological survey. "This," he would say, holding up some seemingly insignificant fragment, a laundry list, with a frantic marginal note about a missing stocking, a receipt for a bottle of ink and a pistol. "This is where the history bleeds. The official record is a taxidermied beast, beautiful, lifelike, and completely dead. This is the scent of its blood when it was alive." Isla was professionally horrified, ethically appalled, and yet in a secret, shadowed chamber of her soul she had never acknowledged, she was electrified. Her entire training was a sacrament of preservation, of stabilization, of maintaining the authoritative, coherent narrative. His practice was a form of archaeology of the psyche, a search for the hairline fractures in the official story, the whispers that contradicted the shout. Their debates were constant, conducted in hissed tones amidst the stacks, a fierce dialectic that left her intellectually bruised and thrillingly alive. "What you call curation, I call censorship," he accused one day, his face close to hers as they argued over his handling of a fragile, hand-tinted map. "And what you call revelation is often just vandalism," she retorted, her heart hammering against her ribs, though not from fear. "Context is everything. You can't just wrench a single sentence from a life and declare it the ultimate truth." "Why not?" His gray eyes challenged her, gleaming in the low, archival light. "Sometimes a single sentence is the truth of a life. The rest is just filler, polite fiction." His residency project gradually focused like a lens on a specific, half-remembered scandal: the abrupt and unexplained dismissal of Eleanor Cavendish, a promising portrait painter from the museum's prestigious patronage program in the early 20th century. The official record was a masterclass in obfuscation, a terse note citing a divergence from agreed artistic direction and a wish for future success elsewhere. Leo smelled a cover-up. He discovered a cryptic entry in a former director's private appointment diary referencing "the Cavendish complication requires delicate burial." He found a gossiping footnote in a society memoir alluding to a certain painter's unfortunate entanglement with a powerful trustee. Despite her better judgment, Isla found herself drawn into the gravitational pull of his investigation. Her formidable archival skills, her knowledge of provenance trails, cross-referencing techniques, her intuitive grasp of institutional filing quirks became the perfect, necessary complement to his wild associative leaps. It was a dangerous synergy. She tracked down loan records, deciphered archaic cataloging codes, and finally located a shipping manifest for a crate sent to a remote coastal address, listed only as "Canvas Personal Effects." The thrill of the collaborative hunt was a potent, addictive stimulant. With Ben, her life was a beautifully solved equation, every variable accounted for. With Leo, it was a page-turning mystery novel where she was both detective and a character suddenly unsure of her own role. The transformation from adversarial colleagues to clandestine conspirators happened not in a moment of soft-focus romance, but in a shared gasping victory amidst grime and ghosts. They were in a long-abandoned sub-basement storage area, a forgotten lung of the museum, following a clue from a partially burned scrap of linen notepaper. The air was thick with the dust of decades and the chill of disuse. Isla, balanced precariously on an ancient wooden stepladder, her white gloves now gray, had located a crate shoved behind a rusted boiler, its markings matching the coded reference. As she attempted to shift it, the rotten wood of the ladder groaned and the crate teetered, threatening to plunge to the concrete floor. He was behind her in an instant, his hands firm on her hips, his body a solid, unyielding wall of heat and muscle against her back, steadying her. The contact was not gentle. It was instantaneous, electric, a circuit completing that sent a violent, delicious shock through her entire being. He did not release her. She could feel the rapid beat of his heart through their layers of clothing, or perhaps it was her own. "Steady," he murmured, his breath a warm disturbance against the shell of her ear, his voice a vibration she felt in her bones. "The past has a weight. It can crush you if you're not careful." Together they wrestled the crate to the floor. Inside, shrouded in disintegrating burlap and brittle newspaper, was Eleanor Cavendish's lost final work. It was not a society portrait. It was a nakedly intimate, psychologically raw depiction of a woman, not the trustee's wife, as records suggested was the commission, but clearly the trustee himself, a man named Alistair Thorne. He was painted not as a pillar of industry, but as a creature of vulnerability and fierce conflicted passion, his gaze direct, challenging, and full of a love that dared not speak its name. It was a brazen, breathtaking masterpiece, and tucked into the back of the stretcher, tied with a faded red ribbon, was a bundle of letters that narrated the true tragic story. A passionate secret affair, a pregnancy, a hushed-up arrangement for Eleanor's discreet exile to the countryside, and the painting's deliberate hiding to protect reputations and a financial empire. They sat on the dusty floor, the spectral light of a single bare bulb illuminating the revealed truth and the charged space between them. The air was thick with a scent of decay and revelation. Leo's face was smudged with dirt, his gray eyes alight with a fierce, triumphant fire that was, for the first time, directed wholly at her, for her. "You see," he said, his voice hushed with awe, "not for the painting, but for the process, for their shared victory. The heart of the story is never in the headline. It's in the footnote everyone tries to erase." His intense gaze dropped from her eyes to her lips, which were parted, breathing in the dust and the danger. "What footnotes are you erasing, Isla Vance?" The first kiss was there, in that cathedral of dust and silenced history. It was nothing like the affectionate, predictable kisses she exchanged with Ben. This was a conflagration. It was desperate, hungry, a claiming and a surrender all at once. It tasted of old paper and cold stone, and the startling metallic flavor of her own liberated fear. It felt less like a sin and more like the discovery of a lost, essential organ, the one responsible for feeling everything she had spent a lifetime politely anesthetizing. After that, the archives transformed from a workplace into their stolen, secret kingdom. The lies she now had to tell Ben were a new, painful language she learned with clumsy, guilt-ridden fluency. Late-night inventory project. Cross-departmental audit requiring after-hours access. A donor symposium running long. Ben, whose world was built on a foundation of mutual trust, as solid as reinforced concrete, accepted her explanations with his characteristic calm faith. His trust was the bedrock upon which she was now, with meticulous and terrified care, constructing a beautiful, intricate, and fundamentally unstable fiction. With Leo, a different Isla, Izzy, as he called her, with a proprietary roughness that made her shiver, came shockingly, vibrantly alive. He took her to his live work studio, a cavernous, chaotic space in an industrial district, a symphony of splattered canvases, half-formed sculptures of welded scrap metal, and the constant throbbing heartbeat of obscure post-punk music. He taught her to mix pigments so vibrant they hurt to look at, to feel the grain of different woods, to see the violence and tenderness in a single brushstroke. They argued about the purpose of art over cartons of cheap Chinese food, their debate punctuated by stolen kisses that tasted of soy sauce and rebellion. He was pure, unrefined impulse, a man who lived in the furnace of the present moment, his bank account a perpetual roller coaster, his spirit arrogantly, defiantly rich in everything that couldn't be catalogued. He was the vibrant, chaotic, unrestored original to Ben's perfect, safety-certified reproduction. At home in the pristine loft, she became a masterful forger of normalcy. She discussed interest rates with Ben, smiled dutifully during video calls with his parents, pored over samples of marble for kitchen countertops, all while the phantom sensation of Leo's hands, permanently stained with cobalt and umber, burned like brands on her skin. She curated her safe, sanctioned life with a new, desperate fastidiousness, as if the sheer, spotless perfection of its surface could magically negate the seismic fault line now rupturing its very foundations. The inevitable crisis was, fittingly, a piece of documented evidence. Ben, ever thorough and responsible, was reconciling their shared household accounts on a quiet Sunday afternoon. A line item on the credit card statement gave him pause. A substantial charge from a high-end art supply store downtown, a place Isla had never, in 7 years, patronized. He asked her about it that evening, his tone not accusatory, but politely curious as he chopped vegetables for a salad. "Oh, that," she said, the lie forming quickly, slick and poisonous on her tongue. "It was a collective gift from the department, for Arthur in conservation, his retirement. He's a wonderful watercolorist, you know." She forced a smile, focusing intently on setting the table. Ben nodded, but the motion was slow, thoughtful. "Arthur? The one with the bad knee? I didn't know he painted." He paused, the knife still in his hand. "I thought you said the artist in residence was causing headaches. Not buying him expensive gifts, I hope." The minor logical inconsistency was a tiny crack in a dam. A week later, Ben's scheduled site inspection was canceled due to unexpected ground conditions. He came home early to an empty apartment. On a whim, he called her direct office line. Her well-meaning but oblivious assistant answered cheerfully. "Oh, hi, Ben. Isla. She and that fascinating Mr. Thorne left a couple of hours ago. Something about a breakthrough on his project, following a lead to some old storage facility. She was so excited." A cold, precise dread, an engineer's understanding of catastrophic structural failure, began to crystallize in Ben's gut. He drove to the museum, his hands tight on the wheel. He found them not in the sterile archives, but in Leo's temporary project space, a room now chaotic with pinned-up images, scrawled notes, and the charged atmosphere of shared obsession. They were standing before a large light table, bodies inclined towards each other, Leo's hand resting possessively on the curve of her lower back as he pointed to something on a magnified photograph. The intimacy of the pose was a silent, screaming headline. It was a language of bodies that required no translation. The world seemed to freeze, the hum of the fluorescent lights dialing up to a deafening roar. Ben's voice, when it finally came, was terrifying in its absolute flat calm. "Isla." She jerked as if struck, whirling around, her face a stunning canvas of guilt, fear, and a dawning horror. Leo straightened up slowly, his hand dropping, his expression shifting from intense focus to a defensive, challenging glare. "Ben," she gasped, the word a useless, pathetic puff of air. What are you doing here?" "I think," he said, his gaze moving with cold, analytical precision from her wide, guilty eyes to Leo's defiant stance and back again. That is the question I should be asking you. But I don't believe I need to. The schematics are quite clear. Every piece of evidence, the late nights, her distracted air, the strange charge, the assistant's casual revelation, snapped together in his mind with the brutal, final click of a lock engaging. The confrontation in their loft later that night was a quiet, surgical dismantling of a shared life. There was no theatrical shouting, no thrown objects. The devastation was carried out with the chilling efficiency of a controlled demolition. "How long has this been going on?" Ben asked. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his back to her, his reflection a pale, rigid ghost in the dark glass. The truth, now that it had to be spoken, felt both insignificant and monstrous. "A little over a month," she whispered, the admission sounding paltry and yet world-ending in the quiet room. He was silent for a long moment, absorbing the data. "And him," he finally said, the word dripping with a contempt so profound it was physically chilling. "This artist, is this who you really are? Is this the true substrate? The one hidden under all the careful finishes we applied? The one who prefers this?" He gestured vaguely, encompassing the idea of Leo, of chaos, of everything their ordered life was not. "It's not that simple, Ben," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face, hot and shameful. "I love you. It wasn't planned. It was a mistake." "Mistakes are adding a column of figures incorrectly, Isla," he roared, the control finally shattering, his voice raw and torn. He turned to face her, and the pain in his eyes was worse than any anger. "This was a choice, a daily, conscious, deliberate choice to lie to me, to bring that chaos into our home, into the life we built together. You looked me in the eye every single day and you chose him." He ran a trembling hand through his hair, his breath coming in ragged, uneven gasps. "I want you to leave. Now. Tonight. I can't. I cannot even look at you without seeing the blueprint of my own gullibility." The packing was a surreal, out-of-body nightmare. She moved through the rooms they had decorated together, a ghost haunting a museum of her own betrayal, pulling clothes and books into a suitcase with numb, clumsy hands. Ben did not watch. He remained at the window, a silhouette of utter devastation against the city's indifferent lights. The sound of her suitcase wheels on the polished concrete floor was the only elegy for their 7-year partnership. She went to Leo's studio, the only port left in the storm she had created. He let her in, wordlessly took her bag, and folded her into his arms as she completely, utterly shattered. "He knows," she sobbed, the words muffled against his paint-stained shirt. "It's over. Everything is over." He held her tighter, his chin resting on her head. "Then stay," he murmured into her hair, his voice a low, possessive rumble. "This is your home now. Stay with me." For several weeks, she tried desperately to believe it. She immersed herself in the chaotic, sensory overload world she had once romanticized from the safe distance of her old life. But the reality was a cold, relentless slap. The studio was drafty, the bathroom was shared, and down a poorly lit hall, the uncertainty of his next sale or commission was a constant, gnawing anxiety that sat like a stone in her stomach. She missed, with a physical ache that surprised her, the deep, quiet comforts of her life with Ben, the reliable warmth, the unspoken understanding, the safety net that had always been there. Leo's passion, which had once felt like a wild, liberating fire, now felt like a capricious, exhausting force that provided heat but no shelter. He lived gloriously, messily in the present. She was now a refugee from her own past, haunted by its wreckage and facing a future that was a terrifying, blank, and unstable canvas. The final, quiet unraveling was not dramatic, but profoundly sad. It was a petty argument over money for groceries that exposed the fundamental fissure. "You wanted a real life, Izzy," he snapped, frustration boiling over as she fretted over their dwindling cash. "This is it. This is the gritty, glorious, uncurated truth. It's not a gallery opening every night. It's ramen and wondering if the check will clear. I know what real is, she cried back, tears of exhaustion and disillusionment spilling over. But I'm drowning in this version of real. I need, I need some structure, some plan. He looked at her then, and the fierce, captivating light in his gray eyes seemed to dim, replaced by a weary, disappointed understanding. I am not a plan, Isla, he said, his voice quiet and final. I am a leap of faith. And somewhere between the archives and here, you forgot how to jump. She left the next morning as a cold, gray dawn bleached the color from the city. She did not go back to Ben. The bridge between them wasn't just damaged, it had been vaporized, leaving only a chasm of mutual betrayal and pain. She rented a small, anonymous apartment in a neighborhood with no history, no memories. She found a job at a small, underfunded historical society, her reputation at the major museum irreparably tarnished by the gossip that had swirled around her and Leo's very public, very messy professional and personal implosion. Months later, she heard through the muted, pitying grapevine of former colleagues that Ben had accepted a long-term engineering project in Singapore. She hoped, with a pain that had settled into a permanent, low-grade atmosphere of regret, like a climate of perpetual overcast, that he was building stronger, truer, more honest structures far away. One rainy afternoon, a parcel with no return address arrived at her new door. Inside, carefully wrapped in layers of tissue paper, was a small, stretched canvas. It was not a typical Leo Thorne piece of explosive abstraction. It was a minutely detailed, hyper-realistic painting of the Special Collections vault, rendered in a subdued, almost monochromatic palette of grays, beiges, and dusty blues. Every archival box was perfectly rendered, every label crisply legible in her own handwriting, the light falling in precise, cold shafts from the unseen ceiling. The order was absolute, the silence palpable. But in the very foreground, lying coiled on the immaculate stone floor like a question mark or a discarded vein, was a single, impossibly vivid thread of crimson red. There was no note, no signature. Isla hung the small painting on the bare white wall of her living room. She would look at it for long stretches of time, sipping her tea in the silence. She had chosen the archive. She had chosen the clean lines, the perfect, predictable order, the safe, catalogued existence. And in making that choice, she had ultimately become its most perfect, its most tragic artifact, meticulously preserved, intellectually valued, and utterly, profoundly alone. The wild red thread of her own passionate, messy, authentic story had been pulled out, leaving behind only the perfect, gray, and impeccably ordered silence. She turned away from the painting, and in the quiet of her own unchosen solitude, she finally began the long, slow, and excruciatingly lonely work of learning how to breathe in the vacuum she had created.